Hello, everybody, and welcome to my section of this course. My name is Hannah, and I am really excited and always really honoured to be asked to do this for the Worst Girl Gang Ever. I absolutely love the work that they do. I really think it's so important, and I think there is a huge gap in all the conversations that they really like to promote. And my part in this course is to talk to you about understanding your fertility and understanding your menstrual cycle and how that can really help support you when you are trying to conceive. So I am an acupuncturist. I work in South London, and our clinic specialises in women's health and in particular in fertility and fertility support. So that's for people either going through natural conception or going through IVF. A big part of my work is around education and empowerment, because as well as being an acupuncturist, I'm also a fertility awareness teacher trainer, which means that I have qualified and studied women's hormones and the menstrual cycle. And I am able to teach people how to track their cycle and understand their cycle, and how they can use this understanding to really improve and increase their chances of conceiving every single month. So I'm really passionate, alongside the acupuncture, about spreading the news, really, because I just think we have all been really missold information as teenagers. The general myth that we were told as teenagers was that if you have unprotected sex, you will get pregnant. And I went to a Catholic school, so nowhere was this message more apparent and more sort of strongly put out there than it was in my education. So there is this real myth that if you have unprotected sex, then you will get pregnant. And, we maybe have had some information or some education around our periods, but when it comes to understanding our menstrual cycle and what it actually means, then I think there are huge gaps of information. I think maybe that might be changing for the younger generation now, but I know that there are lots and lots of people who really have missed out on this information and this education. So I really like to think that we are plugging the gap and we're really shouting about it from the rooftops, because I think it's really important. And the reason that I think it's important is that lots and lots of women that I work with say that they feel really out of control when it comes to trying to conceive, and information about how they can improve their chances comes from the internet or from friends or family. So it's often not necessarily right. It's often a personal experience, and obviously everybody is completely different and unique, and their time to conception is different and unique. So it's really difficult to compare, and you can really quickly begin to feel overwhelmed and completely out of control. So I really want this kind of information and the work that I do to really help people feel a bit more in control, to have a better understanding of their menstrual cycle, which I think can really help reduce your anxiety. And obviously, on a very practical level, it can help improve and increase your time to conception. And it can really help you spot any underlying issues that might be causing problems, so that you can then approach your GP or your health professional and seek advice sooner. So that's the aim of what I'm going to be talking about. So I really hope that it's helpful, and I really hope that I don't speak too quickly, because I get really excited when I talk about this stuff and I start to ramble. So please forgive me if I do that. I will really try hard to speak slowly. So first of all, we're going to start off with your menstrual cycle. And the thing about your menstrual cycle is that nobody really ever discusses is that your menstrual cycle is a vital sign. So along with blood pressure or, your blood group, your menstrual cycle is a vital sign as to what's happening with your health. And an extension of that is that your menstrual cycle really is a vital sign to your fertility. So if you've got a good menstrual cycle, and what is a good menstrual cycle, and we're going to be looking at that, but if you've got a good menstrual cycle and you've got a good understanding of a menstrual cycle, then you've got a good understanding of your fertility and what's happening with that. So we're going to have a quick look through a menstrual cycle, just to talk about what's happening, because I think it can just really help you sort of understand the process behind conception and the process behind, trying to conceive and your fertility. So first of all, obviously, there is the period. We're going to talk about periods a bit later on in the presentation, but the first bit I'm going to talk about is your follicular phase. So the follicular phase of your menstrual cycle is defined as the time from day one of your period to the time that you ovulate. So day one of your period to the time that you ovulate is your follicular phase. And this phase is all about the follicle, one follicle on your ovary developing and growing. And within that follicle, it is housing and maturing an egg, getting that egg ready to be released during ovulation. So there's two things that are happening in this part of your cycle. So the follicle is developing, and alongside the follicle developing is the endometrium. So your uterus lining is thickening and ripening and getting ready for a potential egg that is fertilized to implant and to for a pregnancy to establish itself. So there's two things going on at this point in your cycle. And this point of your cycle is dominated by hormones. So we have FSH, which is the follicle stimulating hormone, which does exactly what it says. It stimulates your follicles. We have LH, luteinizing hormone, which is the hormone that if you use ovulation predictor kits, and we're going to talk about those in a little while, this is the hormone that the ovulation predictor kits will pick up on, when you do that sample, that urine sample. And this is the hormone that is associated with releasing the actual egg. And obviously, we've also got estrogen at this time, which is involved in developing the follicle, but mostly involved in developing and thickening that endometrium ready for any implantation. So what's important to know about this phase of your cycle is that it can vary, it can change. So really, we're looking at something between 10 and 20 days. So 10 is the minimum amount of time really that we want for an egg to be matured and developed and released. And 20 days is the maximum amount of time. And what can happen is that if you're ovulating before day 10 or after day 10, after day 20, it could be that the egg is either too immature to be fertilized, or it could be that the egg is actually too mature, so it's too damaged and it's not good enough quality to be fertilized. So it's important that this phase, so the time from our period to when the egg is released, is between 10 and 20 days. What's also important to know is that this phase of our menstrual cycle can be massively influenced by what's happening in our lives. So if we are stressed, if we are poorly, if we're eating badly, if we're over-exercising, under-exercising, anything, any shocks, anything external, it can really have an impact on this phase of our cycle. So if your period is ever late or early, it is this bit of our cycle that has been interfered with and interrupted. So it's important just to know that fact, that that's where the change, if your cycle starts to change, this is the bit that's been impacted upon. So the next phase of our menstrual cycle is ovulation. And what's really interesting about ovulation is actually the main event of your cycle. So the whole purpose of your reproductive hormones, of your period, of your endometrium, of the whole of this reproductive anatomy is to get your body to ovulate. So ovulation really is the main event, which is really interesting because so many of us have been told so much, or, if we've been told anything, it's about our periods. But when it comes to actually understanding that actually our cycle is there to create and support and make ovulation, it kind of switches it round. And I have never really, until I started studying this and became an acupuncturist, I never really grasped that concept that your menstrual cycle, the whole point of it is to get your body to ovulate. So ovulation is the big event. And what's important is that, if you read textbooks, everybody talks about ovulation happens on day 14. And this is really, a massive sort of piece of information that can really be unhelpful, because approximately about 10% of women ovulate on day 14. So if you are timing your sex to be around day 14, it could be that you're missing it, because we know that people can ovulate, as we saw on the last slide, between day 10 and day 20, and it can change with every single cycle. So just because you ovulated on day 12 last cycle, it doesn't mean that you'll ovulate on day 12 next cycle, because as we know, the first half of our cycle is influenced by our lifestyle. So it might change the day that we ovulate with each month. Some people, obviously, they do ovulate on a regular time and it's like clockwork, but actually the vast majority of people change. It changes every month. And so this is a really key piece of information, because if you're trying to conceive, then you really want to make sure that you are really confident in pinpointing the day that you ovulate and the day that you're fertile, because this is how you're going to maximize your chances of conception. So just knowing that it can move and it's not always mid-cycle is a good thing to be aware of. The other thing to say is that, you know, we only ovulate once a month. So whereas men are fertile every single day, you know, obviously if the sperm is okay, then men are potentially fertile every single day that they're walking around on the planet. Whereas for women, you know, we're really only fertile for about 5 or 6 days every single month, and we only ever produce one egg. So that myth that you were told, which goes back to my point at the beginning, that if you have unprotected sex, you can get pregnant, is really a massive myth. It's actually only 5 or 6 days every single month that you can possibly conceive. So, you know, what I really hope is going to come through in all of the information that I'm giving you today is that understanding and knowing when that time is the key to, you know, feeling in control of your fertility and maximizing your chances each month. So once you have ovulated, you are now into the luteal phase of your menstrual cycle. So the luteal phase goes from the time that you ovulate right the way through to day 1 of your cycle again. And this phase of your menstrual cycle is all about the potential fertilization of your egg. So the hormones that were dominant in the first half of your cycle, so estrogen, FSH and LH, they have all dropped now that you've ovulated. And the hormone that dominates the second half of your cycle is progesterone. So progesterone really is all about keeping you safe and looking after you for any potential embryo that has been fertilized and is there, you know, ready to establish an early pregnancy. So progesterone is made by the corpus luteum. So the follicle in the first half of your cycle that was housing the egg, it releases the egg, and this follicle becomes what's called the corpus luteum. So it's like it's an amazing organ within its own right that starts to emit progesterone. So your body can only make progesterone if you have ovulated. If you don't ovulate, then your body cannot make progesterone because there isn't an empty follicle sac to then become the corpus luteum. So it's you know, this is why if you check your basal body temperature, it can confirm you've ovulated, because when your body releases progesterone, your body temperature increases. And this is what you're looking for when you're doing basal body temperature. And we're going to talk about that later on in the talk. But for now, it's just important to know that the second half of your cycle is dominated by the hormone progesterone, and progesterone is there to kind of plump up and sort of hold on to the uterus lining, so that if there is an embryo, there is time for the embryo to move down the fallopian tube and to find somewhere within the uterus to implant and for a successful pregnancy to establish. So what's important about this half of your menstrual cycle, and I talk to women that I work with a lot about this, is that it's really important to make sure you're tracking how long this length of your cycle is. So in an ideal world, you want it to be over 12 days. So you want the time from your ovulation right through to your period to be lasting for at least 12 days, because we know it can take up to 3 days for the egg, once it's been released, to travel from, and it's been fertilized, to travel down the fallopian tube into the uterus. It can take up to 3 days for it to find its location in the uterus to implant. And then it can take again some time for that implantation to sort of really establish itself, and for that implantation to then kick off the HCG, the hormone that is related to being pregnant. So what happens is that if your luteal phase is too short, so if it's shorter than, let's say, 11 days, there is not enough time for this process to happen before the uterus lining sheds. So that's why tracking your cycle and understanding the days to your time of ovulation and the days from your time of ovulation to your period can be really important to check whether your cycle is actually a fertile cycle. Because if your luteal phase is shorter, then there is potential that that cycle is not actually fertile, and pregnancy, even if sperm and egg are meeting, there isn't enough time for a pregnancy to establish itself before your period comes. Some people do get pregnant with a shorter luteal phase. It does happen, but I just think it makes it increasingly difficult. So it is an area to look at. So it's an area to track. The other thing to say about this phase of your menstrual cycle is that progesterone can only live in your body for 16 days, about 16 days. It cannot stay longer than 16 days unless you are pregnant. So again, it's if you're taking your temperature, if you're tracking your cycle, if your luteal phase is longer than 16 days, it's a really good indicator that a successful pregnancy has happened, and that pregnancy is establishing itself. So again, you can get some information about what's happening with your body by tracking and being clear on what's happening with your menstrual cycle. So that's just a quick brief overview of what happens with your menstrual cycle. And obviously, if ovulation, if pregnancy doesn't happen, if an embryo doesn't embed into the uterus lining, then what happens is that your hormone levels drop and your period starts again, and you're back into a new cycle. So what's important about every single cycle is maximizing your chances of conception by being really clear when you are ovulating and when your most fertile time is. So, there are a number of ways that you can do this. And I'm a really, really big fan of using cervical mucus to really maximize and know when your ovulation window is. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about why I'm such a fan of checking your cervical mucus. I hope you like my picture there. So first of all, let's talk about the other ways that you can check when you're fertile. So lots of people will use ovulation predictor kits. So these are the kits that you wee on, and they pick up your rising estrogen levels, and they can pick up your luteinizing hormone, which we talked about earlier on. And, no offense to these, or I think they do have a time, and they do have a place, and they can be really helpful. But I think what's interesting to note is that if you're relying, statistics have shown that if you rely on ovulation predictor kits to show when your fertile window is, often people can have less sex because people wait until they get the peak on their ovulation predictor kit before they start having sex. So statistically, you're more likely to have less sex. And the other thing that is important to know about ovulation predictor kits is that sometimes you can actually miss your window, or you can time it a bit too late, because statistically, your most fertile time is actually before you ovulate. Because once you ovulate, once the egg is released, as soon as that egg is released, we know that it begins to deteriorate. So the quality of the egg begins to decline. And when the quality of the egg begins to decline, its ability to be fertilized also begins to decline. So in an ideal world, statistically, if you have fresh sperm waiting the minute that you ovulate, this is the best way and the most likely way that you are going to conceive. So your most fertile time is actually before you ovulate. So if you are waiting for your ovulation predictor kit to show you're about to ovulate and you wait until that point to have sex, sometimes it can be too late. And obviously not for everybody, you know, we're talking fertile window here. So there are usually about 5 days with which you can get pregnant. But all the research shows that having sex before you ovulate is the best way to maximize your chance that month. And so if you're using ovulation predictor kits, it's quite easy to miss it, quite frankly. And as I said, people have less sex. So that's why I'm not a massive fan of ovulation predictor kits. And that's why I think they need to sort of have a warning with them. The other thing to say about ovulation predictor kits is that if you have any issues around ovulation, so if you've got polycystic ovaries, or if there's kind of something going on with your ovulation, if your ovulation isn't always clear, then you can miss it, or you can just get a false reading. So you can get a rise in the LH, but it doesn't necessarily always mean that you are actually ovulating. So, you know, they really need to be used just with caution. The other thing to say is that lots of people use apps. So, you know, lots of apps like Flow or Clue, or I can't think of any others, but anyway, there's loads of them out there. So lots of people use their apps. They put, you know, you put in your data of when your period comes, and your app will tell you when your fertile window is. And the warning that I think is important to remember about these is that it's just an algorithm. It just goes on the average. So it's not necessarily unique to you, because what's important and what I really like about, you know, understanding your cycle and reading your own body signs is that you will realize that, you know, everybody is unique. Everybody is different. We all ovulate at different times. Our bodies are all completely different. And so if you're looking at an app and you're using an algorithm, it's just giving you a generalized kind of average. So it can really throw you off if you rely on that information too much. So I am the massive fan of the old cervical mucus. So nobody ever tells us about cervical mucus. Nobody's ever had this bloody conversation, and it really drives me crackers, because it is the best way to maximize your chances of conception each month. Because when you see your fertile mucus, you are potentially fertile, and you're not going to miss your window if you start having sex when you see your mucus. It's as simple as that. Well, it's not rocket science. It's really simple, but nobody has ever taught us this piece of information. So what I think lots of people get confused about is, how do you spot it? Like, what's it all about, and how do you spot it? And, you know, the thing about cervical mucus is that I've worked with people who thought that cervical mucus wasn't like an infection, or that something was wrong, or that, you know, they had no idea what it was about. And that is not surprising, because nobody has ever told us, and nobody has had this conversation. So, you know, there are a number of ways to spot your cervical mucus, and a number of ways to look out for it. So, you know, the one of the ways that they talk about is to notice the sensation of cervical mucus. So the chances are you have your period finishes, you stop bleeding, and the chances are you will experience a level of dryness around your vulva. And, you know, if you go to the loo and you wipe, you know, when you've had a wee, and when you wipe with your toilet roll, it probably drags across your perineum. And if you're walking around, it's a kind of dry sensation. If you really tune into it, no, it sounds weird, but try it for me and tell me what you think. Because if you really tune into it, you can notice a sensation of dryness. And what's most important is that when your body begins to produce cervical mucus, you will notice the sensation of wetness. Or when you go for a wee and you wipe, you will notice that instead of a drag, it actually slides, it glides across. So lots and lots of people have this pattern of cervical mucus. So they'll have their period, they'll have a period of being dry, and then they'll suddenly notice that they have a slippery sensation. You know, I'm not even going to say what day it appears, because the day really changes person to person, and what you need to do is find out what's unique for you. Some people have cervical mucus, or they have like discharge every single day, and again, that is completely normal. And the thing that you are wanting to look out for, if this is you, to notice when you are most fertile is when does it change? So when does it go from like sticky? So if your period finishes and you still have some discharge and it's sticky and it's thick and maybe it's a bit grainy, and then a few days later you notice it goes slippery, then this is your change and this is your fertile window being officially open. So it's the slippery, it's the slidey, it's the kind of lubricative sensation that you are looking for. If you can't make a distinction between dryness and slippery, or kind of the sticky and the slippery, go with the fact that if you've got cervical mucus of any description, then you are potentially fertile, and therefore it is time to start having, regular sex through your fertile window. So you can keep it really simple and try it this way. So yeah, so your toilet paper is, one of the best ways is to, to wipe. So sometimes I encourage women to, to go to the loo and wipe before they actually have a wee. Or, it's never too TMI for an acupuncturist. After you've had a bowel movement is a really good time to look for cervical mucus, because you are literally using the same muscles, and cervical mucus, if it's there, has to come out. It cannot stay within the vagina. It is released from the body. So after a bowel movement is a really good time to look. And the reason why cervical mucus is so important is that it literally keeps the sperm alive. So the pH of the vagina is the wrong pH when you don't have cervical mucus. In the, if you have sex and you don't have cervical mucus, then the semen in the vagina, it basically dies because the pH is wrong. But when you have cervical mucus, it keeps the sperm alive. It actually has an ability to sort of, get rid of the sperm that's not very good, and it enables the sperm to travel through the uterus to the fallopian tube and meet the egg. So it is, the magic substance that if we don't have it, we can't get pregnant. And therefore, it's a real key indicator of your fertility. It's a key indicator that your cycle is working well, and that your hormones are working well, and that your estrogen level is, getting to a good level to enable your cervix to make the cervical mucus. And it's a sign that your body is about to ovulate. So it's really, really good stuff. We need to be talking about it more, because it can be really, really helpful when you're trying to conceive. The other way that, the other thing that people do to track their cycle is to use what's called basal body temperature. And this is where you take your temperature every morning before you get out of bed, record it down on a piece of paper, and look for a pattern of change. And what can happen is that in your follicular phase, so the phase we talked about at the beginning, so the time from your period to ovulation, your temperature will be lower. And then once you have ovulated, because your body is now producing progesterone, and progesterone has a heating quality to it, your temperature rises, and your temperature will stay high, for at least 3 days. And this confirms that you have ovulated. And if there is no pregnancy, what will happen is your temperature drops. And this is a sign that your period is about to come, because the progesterone is basically dropping and leaving the body, which signals to your uterus lining to shed and for your cycle to start again. So taking your basal body temperature, it cannot predict when you are about to ovulate, but it can confirm that you have ovulated. So it can be a really helpful tool if you are concerned that you're not ovulating, or if you think there's something wrong with your cycle. Then this can be a really helpful way to, confirm that ovulation is happening, and to check that, the first half of your cycle and the second half of your cycle is long enough and, is working well enough to support any potential pregnancy. So you can get some good pieces of information from basal body temperature. But I do have a little bit of a warning about basal body temperature, in that I think for some people it can be stressful. You have to do it every single day. You have to do it at the same time every single day. And the thing about it is that, when you're trying to conceive, it's like you wake up in the morning, you take your basal body temperature, and it's already, before you've even opened your eyes or got out of bed, you are thinking about, conception, your cycle, what's happening, and it sometimes can be just too much and a little bit too stressful and a bit too much of a reminder of this, difficult situation you're going through. So, and also for some people, it can, you can get a bit obsessed with it and it can be difficult to read your chart. So it can be helpful, but I always give it with a warning that, use with caution. And if you find it stressing you out, then don't use it. So, that's my take. If you want more information about basal body temperature, then I'll talk about my other course at the end of this, but I have got a whole section on how to do it and how to record it properly and what the charts can mean and what they can indicate. But I don't really want to go into that amount of information here, but there is, I do have that information should you want it. So the reason why, I'm talking about this and to go back to what I mentioned at the beginning is that your period and your menstrual cycle and your ovulation and knowing about all of this, like I said, it's a vital sign. So it can give you some really good indicators of any underlying issues that might be affecting your ability to conceive. So when it comes to your actual period itself, there's a few things that I think you can look out for that might give you clues to, note down, pay attention to, and discuss with your GP or medical practitioner if you've got concerns. Excuse me while I have a drink. So for your period itself, if your period is less than 20 days, so, day one of your cycle to day one of your next cycle, if this cycle is less than 20 days, or if it's more than 36 days, it could be a sign that you're not ovulating, or that you're ovulating too soon, or that you're ovulating too late, and therefore the eggs are too immature to be fertilized, or over mature, too mature to be fertilized. So, the tracking your cycle and knowing your cycle length can really give you an indicator of whether there's something going wrong or some problems with your ovulation. So it's a really important one to look out for. So you want your period to be, more than 21 days, and you want it to be less than 36 days. The other thing to say about your actual period is that pain is not normal. So the number of women or people who have periods that I treat who have experienced pain throughout their whole lifetime, and because they've experienced through their whole lifetime, and maybe their friends or other people in their family also have painful periods, it can very easily be assumed that that is a normal part of being a woman. It's a normal part of having a menstrual cycle, and it is absolutely not. A minimal amount of discomfort and a minimal amount of pain, okay, yeah, it does happen, and that is normal. But pain that does not respond to painkillers, or pain that means you miss school or you miss work or you miss any occasion, or it debilitates you to the point where you have to cancel your plans, it is not normal. It needs investigating, because any issue of pain could be related to endometriosis, adenomyosis, pelvic inflammatory disease, fibroids. There's numerous things that it could be associated with, and it always needs investigating, because this could be affecting your fertility, or it can be an early sign that something might be impeding your ability to conceive. And the sooner it is investigated, the sooner something can be done about it. So please do not accept that, or be dismissed, or accept that it's okay to be dismissed, that pain is a normal part of having a menstrual cycle, because it absolutely is not, and it always needs investigating further. So I really advise that, if you do have pain, that you record it down, you record how long it lasts for, you record the intensity of the pain, and you record all the things that you might have tried to alleviate the pain that didn't work, so that you have a body of evidence to take to your GP when you want to seek help. And I am going to talk about that in a bit more detail later on. The other thing to talk about with relation to your period is that the flow. It's really important to pay attention to the flow of your period, because again, this could be giving you clues about your fertility and about things that might be affecting your fertility. So if your period is too heavy, and when I say too heavy, I mean to the point where you are flooding at night, when you're using, maybe you're using a sanitary towel and a tampon, or a sanitary towel and a moon cup, and because it's overflowing, if you're having to change your pad more than every hour, this is too heavy and it needs to be investigated, because again, it could be a sign of fibroids, of polyps, it could be a sign of endometriosis, or it could be a sign of an underactive thyroid, all of which can affect your ability to conceive. So really important to get it investigated. Also, if your period is really heavy, it can make you anemic, which can also really influence your body's ability to conceive and your general health. So always needs investigating. The other thing to look at with your period and pay attention to is is it too light? So if your period is less than a day long, if there's no good flow to it, if the color is not bright red, then it could be a sign that your endometrial lining is not building big enough or thick enough to be, a good environment with which to accept any potential embryos. So it could be a sign that your estrogen levels are not getting high enough. And this can often be seen if you're underweight or if you're exercising too much. It can really be a thing that can, reduce that endometrial lining, and therefore it can, not for everybody, because again, everybody is different, but it can impede your body's ability to conceive. So my job as an acupuncturist is to be a detective. So I like to look up every single bit around the menstrual cycle and see if there are clues and what we can do about that. And a period that is too light can influence your fertility, so it does need to be investigated. Again, the other thing to look for is spotting. So spotting before your period comes. I mean, at the end of a period, it is not uncommon, and I'm not too worried about that. But if you're somebody who gets spotting for 3 to 4 days or 2 or 3 days before your period comes, again, it could be a sign that your endometrium is coming away too soon, and it can be impacting your fertility. It can be a sign that your progesterone levels are not staying high enough. So any spotting that is brown spotting for 2 or 3 days before your period comes, I would say it's something to investigate, something to track, and something to keep an eye on, because it could be a sign that your progesterone levels are not reaching the level that they need to support any potential pregnancy. So other things to think about when we're looking at your menstrual cycle is first of all, it's important to think about, if you're beginning to try and conceive, is to think about any potential STDs. So chlamydia can be a really big one that can impact on your fertility, any pelvic inflammatory disease. So you might not necessarily even have any clues that this is an issue, because often these STDs can be silent. So it's really important to be screened and to make sure that there's nothing that could be impacting your cycle and obviously ovulation and your ability to conceive. The other thing to talk about is contraception. So when you have been on contraception, depending on which contraception you have been on, it can take some time when you come off it for your cycle to establish itself to be a good menstrual and fertile cycle, potentially fertile cycle. So different contraceptions have different impacts. So for example, I think the progesterone only pill can have the longest impact once you've stopped taking it, for your cycle to become re-established. So I work with lots and lots of women who often, when they come off the pill or the coil, can have very light periods, or they can have a short luteal phase, or their time to ovulation can be short. And what's important, that even though you're having a cycle, so you might stop taking the pill and you might have a cycle, but is it a fertile cycle? Is the ovulation coming at the right time? Is the luteal phase long enough? Is the lining getting thick enough? And it might be that for 2 or 3 cycles, the hormones aren't sort of strong enough and well established enough again. So those cycles might not be fertile. So it's important to remember this, because often what a classic thing that I see in clinic is that people come to see me and maybe they've been off the pill for 9 months and they feel concerned that they've not fallen pregnant, and they're starting to really worry and get anxious that something's wrong. And actually, when we go into detail and we look back at their menstrual cycle, what we realize is that the first 4 cycles that they had were not actually even fertile cycles, because they were ovulating too soon, or the cycle was too short, or the luteal phase wasn't long enough. So actually their ability to conceive for those first 4 cycles was probably greatly reduced. So actually they've only had potentially 5 fertile cycles. So, the difference between trying for 9 months and the difference between actually trying for 5 months is a big one psychologically, because it means that it might not necessarily mean that there is an underlying issue, and continuing to try for a little bit longer is probably a good idea, and that actually 4 of those cycles can be discounted. So really important to know that. And it's not a message that is out there, because the message is that if you're on contraception, you're not fertile, and if you're off it, you are. It's not always as clear and simple as that. And although contraception for most people doesn't have any long-term impact on their fertility, I do think that for a lot of people, for the first 3 to 6 months, there can be an impact. And it's important that we know about that, so we don't stress out and start panicking too soon. The other thing to say is that if you have been through a miscarriage, the subsequent cycles can be affected. So again, really important to understand that, your hormones have been impacted and affected, and it's completely normal for your cycle to go a bit haywire for 2, 3, sometimes up to 6 cycles after a miscarriage. And just because it's gone a bit strange doesn't mean that it won't settle down again. It just needs time, and you need to be aware that those cycles after your miscarriage might not be fertile, because the hormones might not be working as they were previously. So again, good to know that, just to try and reduce anxiety and just to feel in control as to what's happening with your body. The other thing to think about is in all of this is that we're looking at women's bodies, and we're looking at menstrual cycles, and we're looking at maximizing ovulation, and looking at what is a fertile cycle. And this is 50% of the situation, because the other 50% is down to sperm. And increasingly, what we are seeing is that up to 50% of fertility issues are now male factor. So I can't remember what the statistics are, forgive me. I think it's about 35% is male factor alone. And then there's about 20% that is male and female factor combined. So we put that together, you're up to 50%. And so, the vast majority of people I see in my clinic are women, and the vast majority of people who are taking supplements, tracking their cycles, changing their lifestyle, reducing their alcohol. Women are doing all of these amazing things to support their health and support their fertility. But we really need to be looking at what men are doing alongside this, because it's really important. So getting a sperm test done is not an unreasonable thing to do. I think, the sooner you get it done, the sooner you A, know there's an issue, or B, know that it's okay, and you can carry on. So I think information is power, and knowledge is really important at this stage. So if you're trying to conceive and you are concerned about this, then go along to your GP and ask if they can do a sperm test for you. If you have any problems with this, you can also refer privately and do a sperm test through Medichecks. So there's actually quite a few companies out there that do it. If you want information about this, you can get in contact with me and I can give it to you. But what's important to remember is that male factor is up to 50% of infertility, and also is involved in miscarriage. So we need to be having more conversations and awareness raising around this, and not be assuming that because it happens to a woman, it's therefore a woman's issue. So I hope I'm nearly at the end of this now. But what is important with all of this is to track your cycle. So whether you do it, I've got a tracker. I've got one like this for your basal body temperature and for your cervical mucus. I've also got another one with more detail on symptoms that you can get through your menstrual cycle that you can download off my website. But whether you use this or whether you use an app with caution, what's important is to track, because what you really need to be recording is when your period starts, when you're ovulating, and when your period starts again. They are your basic bits of information, because what you will determine by that is your cycle regular, is your ovulation regular, and when your ovulation is, and is your cycle a fertile cycle? So, you know, is it all evenly distributed, and is it working well so that the conception could happen with that cycle? So by tracking it, you will really be able to keep an eye, and you'll really be able to work out your pattern and what is normal for you, because as I say, everybody is completely different, and that is completely okay and how it should be. But what you want to understand is what is normal for you, because when things are not right, you'll be able to spot it sooner. And the other thing about tracking your cycle is that it will give you information to take to your GP or your health provider, or whoever you're going to see, whether it's an acupuncturist or a nutritionist, or, you know, whoever you're going to see. If you've got all your information about your cycles, that health professional that you are working with will really be able to help you look at that and interpret that and gain some information about what could be going on with your general health that might be impacting your menstrual cycle and therefore impacting your fertility. So arming yourself with this information can be really, really powerful. I always think that, you know, the NHS guidelines say that they recommend you try for a year before going for testing. But I think that if you are tracking your cycle and you're clear on your ovulation window, and you have been having enough sex through your ovulation window, you've been having it at the right time, if 6 months have gone by and your cycle has been normal and nothing has happened, then I think that is a good time to go and seek help. So, you know, whether it's going to get a sperm test, whether you go and get your hormones tested, whether you go and get your thyroid tested, you know, there are some basic tests that are really helpful to get done. And I think waiting for 12 months can be too long, especially when you know that your cycle has been working well and you've been doing everything, you know, that we've discussed through this presentation. The other thing to say is that if, you know, you're tracking and you notice within 2 or 3 months some problems, so if you notice that your ovulation is coming late, or if you notice that your luteal phase is only 9 days, or that you're getting spotting before your period, then, you know, don't wait 6 months, go immediately to get the information and get some support from your GP. So tracking is really the only way that you can gain this information and gather it to take as a body of evidence to get help and support further. So yeah, I've peaked too soon on this one. So yeah, as I said before, you know, don't wait, go and get help. So if you've got problems, go and get help. If you notice problems like the pain or the bleeding or the irregular cycles, seek help immediately. Don't forget male factor. So don't always assume that it's female factor and that it's you. Always make sure that your partner is checked out. And if you've been tracking your cycle and it's been completely normal and nothing has happened after 6 months, please, I would say go and seek some help and go and seek some support and get some tests done at that point. The other thing to say is that if you want information about what tests to get done, then on my Instagram page, I did 2 lives about what tests to get done and what tests to ask for from your GP. So all that information is on there. And if you want any more information or support on that, because it can be difficult, let me tell you, especially at the moment in this time of COVID, you know, even getting an appointment to see your GP can be really difficult. So if you want some support with that, then please do get in contact, because I'm always happy to help. So back to full screen, I had some top tips, and now I can't find them. So my top tips really, or my tips to leave you with before I go, are really around, I've basically covered all of it here, but really what I think are the best things that you can do is to track your cycle. So make sure you're recording the information, because as I said, that information is power, and it's really going to help you, get tests done and really help you have a good conversation with your doctor, if you want to go down that road. And it's also going to give you information to look back on, so you can spot any problems that might be impacting your body's ability to conceive. It's really important to not compare your journey with other people's, because getting pregnant is not always straightforward for people. It can be complicated, and as we've seen, it's not as simple as having unprotected sex. They lied to us when we were teenagers, and it is difficult to get pregnant because you are only fertile for about 5 days every cycle. And if you're hitting that window, they estimate that for about 25 to 30%, you've got about a 25 to 30% chance of conceiving each month if you're hitting your ovulation window, if there's no underlying issues. So it's not always a given. It's not always straightforward. It can be complicated. It can take time. And that is a message that's really important to get out there, because what I think can happen, and what I see often, is the people who get pregnant quickly, they often shout about it from the rooftops. We just had to look at each other and we got pregnant. That is a message that we hear a lot. And what we don't hear a lot is the fact that lots and lots of people do struggle, and it's a conversation that we don't have enough. And therefore we sort of don't normalize that getting pregnant can take time, and getting pregnant is complicated, and it is not as simple as having unprotected sex. So I think it's really important to not compare what's happening with you to anybody else, because it's not helpful. We're all unique and we're all different. So don't compare yourself. And the final thing is that understanding your cycle and feeling in control with your cycle is probably one of the best ways to alleviate anxiety as much as possible. And know that feeling anxious at this time when you're trying to conceive, is normal. It's part of the process. And that if you are concerned about anything, if you're concerned about your cycle, if you're concerned about your general health, then seek help soon, because the sooner you seek help, and the sooner you can get tested, and the sooner you can get any issues investigated, then the sooner you can find a solution to the problem. So don't wait. Don't suffer in silence. Don't continue to try and try. Seek help, get some support, and use your information from your tracking to really help get in front of the right people and get those tests done. So I think that is all from me. I really hope I haven't spoken too quickly. I really hope that this has been helpful and has given you some good information that can really help you look at your cycle and help you to learn and understand your cycle. I'm always around. You're very welcome to DM me or email me if you would like more information. I do have a whole course dedicated to this topic. It's called Teaching to Conceive. You can buy it on my website, or you can buy it through my Instagram page. And it's basically, it goes into all of this information into much more detail. So I've got a whole chapter on your menstrual cycle. I've got a whole chapter on lifestyle factors that influence your fertility. I've got a whole chapter on tracking your cervical mucus, whole chapter on basal body temperature. So it really, what I've given you is a snapshot of my course. If you want to go into more detail, then it is there, and you are very welcome to buy it. I think there is a 20% discount through the Worst Girl Gang Ever. So, I hope that's helpful. Best of luck, and I look forward to hearing from you if you ever need any help. Thank you.